Boynton v. Virginia was a landmark decision by the Supreme Court that overturned a judgment convicting Royce Boynton for trespassing by being in the whites-only section of a Richmond, Virginia restaurant. As the restaurant was located in a bus terminal, the decision held that Boynton's conviction violated the Interstate Commerce Act, a federal law prohibiting discrimination in interstate passenger transportation. The ruling held that public bus transportation of any sort was sufficiently related to interstate commerce, and so the federal government was now able to override state and municipal segregation laws on interstate buses and terminals. On December 20th, 1958, Royce Boynton left school for Christmas break and boarded a bus bounded for Montgomery, Alabama. Several hours had passed and the bus made a stop in Richmond, Virginia. Hungry and tired, Boynton left the bus and decided to grab something to eat at one of the terminal's many restaurants. While seated at the main counter overlooking the menu, a waitress approached and asked if he could please sit in the section of the restaurant reserved for African Americans. Boynton, a law student and civil rights activist, refused to leave the counter, declaring that he was allowed to eat anywhere he chose. The police were subsequently called, and Boynton was arrested and taken to the local precinct. On January 6, 1959, Royce Boynton was charged and convicted of a misdemeanor and fined $10 by the Richmond Police Court for violation of state law. After several failed attempts to appeal his decision at the state level, Boynton filed a petition to the United States Supreme Court under the representation of Thurgood Marshall on September 15, 1959. In his argument before the Supreme Court, Marshall established precedents by citing Morgan v. Virginia and Syracuse v. Carolina Coach Company, two decisions meant to desegregate interstate buses. Reiterating similar arguments, Marshall asserted that Boynton's arrest placed an unreasonable burden on commerce and denied Boynton equal protection under the law. His efforts ultimately proved successful, for on December 5, 1960, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of Boynton, stating that the state of Virginia violated his rights as an interstate passenger as per the Interstate Commerce Act of 1887. The 7 members of the majority concluded that Virginia's attempt to punish Bruce Boynton contravened federal law and that it was an error of the Supreme Court of Virginia to affirm his conviction. Justice Hugo Black wrote the majority decision, deeming that in this particular case, the restaurant operated as an integral part of the bus carrier's transportation service for interstate passengers. In the aftermath of the ruling, civil rights activists intended to test the ruling in interstate transportation. Their actions culminated in the Freedom Riders movement, a movement that involved interracial teams traveling on Greyhound and Travelway buses in hopes of encouraging transportation desegregation. On May 4, 1961, 13 Freedom Riders divided into 2 groups and boarded Greyhound buses from Washington, D.C. that would cross Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Alabama. The bus managed to cross the first 3 states without much incident. However, when the bus entered Alabama, violence and turmoil ensued. While in Anniston, Alabama, a mob of white residents attacked the bus, slashing its tires and bombarding it with rocks and a firebomb. Despite this, the riots continued, and violence between Freedom Riders and pro-segregationists escalated, which included further beatings, bomb threats, and even the imprisonment of riders in southern jails and prisons. The riots quickly became a national story and fueled political debate, which greatly angered Southern political leadership.
These people are going from town to town and getting off the bus and seeking through mixed groups, Negro men and white women, to force themselves into situations which tend to inflame the local people.
By the time the Freedom Riders began traveling south, the Kennedy administration did everything in its power to find a peaceful solution. After several failed attempts to find one, President Kennedy's Attorney General, Robert Kennedy, took action. Petitioning the Interstate Commerce Commission to enforce the Boynton decision, Robert Kennedy sought to finally put an end to the violence.
We will make sure that people traveling in interstate commerce and traveling across our highways are not molested, and traveling through our cities are not harmed. That's all I asked for.
Regrettably, violence against the Freedom Riders continued, and the Kennedy administration increasingly found itself at the margins of the movement. Even so, Robert Kennedy's use of the Boynton decision to compel the Interstate Commerce Commission to act was both a major victory and a historically significant event for the civil rights movement, as it would incite Americans to place public pressure on the federal government to implement social change.